Having been warned about Asia during the monsoon season, we really hadn't seen the kind of thunderous downpours that had been predicted. This afternoon was the exception. Upon our descent from Moon Hill, we were promptly approached by a couple of touts, each from one of the various cave tours in the area. We went along with the guy who claimed that his cave was one of the newer, least seen caverns around. Always a fan of the underdog, it seemed good enough for us. The weather seemed to have its own ideas, and so did the children. For now, it seemed, we could only wait out the storm in the shelter of our guide's home. As the hour grew later, it became apparent that the cave would have to wait for another day. When the rain finally let up enough to leave, we ran into the children once again. Only this time, we made some attempts to win them over. A couple glimpses through the camera, and they were hooked. They loved pushing the button and taking a picture. What was once strange was now fun. It was an obvious point, but so easily overlooked. A small gesture can go a long way toward making friends. It can be the difference between a rewarding, successful journey or just another trip. As we were getting ready to leave, we were once again reminded that kids will be kids, no matter where you find them. As for Bob, perhaps you've heard of his legend, the man with all the gadgets who once visited Yangshuo. Our time in Yangshuo was winding down, but we still had a few things left to do. The first was to simply get up early and experience morning the way the Chinese do. While traditional stretching was okay for some, the contemporary stuff was not far behind. And with the modern music came the modern moves. Soon the music faded, and Yangshuo was ready for another day. For us, it was time to go. Yangshuo had been everything we thought rural China would be. Here, we had found a China that seemed more like Mayberry RFD than the American idea of a communist state. As we said our farewells, it seemed unlikely that any other place we would visit in China would be as irresistible as this one. We wondered how long this soothing little corner of Asia could resist the pressures of a rapidly changing world. And so, once again, we hit the road, wondering what lay ahead, and somehow feeling that Yangshuo would be a tough act to follow. From Yangshuo, we worked our way to Sichuan province in the moderate-sized town of Leshan. We had been charmed by Yangshuo and were hoping Leshan would compare. Had we made a mistake? Perhaps gotten off the bus too early? No, this was Leshan all right. A big, sprawling Chinese city with all the charm of a paint factory. We had gotten used to the laid-back pace and open feel of Yangshuo. Leshan, however, brought us back to earth. It was a cold shot of reality that reminded us just how crowded China really was. It was obvious we were in need of an attitude adjustment, so we wandered around town to see if we couldn't warm up to this place. Leshan was big and busy, with one foot in the new world and one foot in the old. Tried and true tradition bumped heads with the 90s. While some people opted for a modern look, others preferred not to make a fashion statement. And like people everywhere, the day wasn't complete without a stop at the market to pick up the evening's meal. Of course, to us, the items at this market seemed more like refugees from a pet store than tonight's dinner. And while many of the items were familiar, others were perhaps best left to the Chinese. Of course, being in the heart of Sichuan province, we had to try some authentic Sichuan cuisine, so we found a place that seemed popular with the locals and grabbed a seat, hoping we could remember the Chinese word for vegetarian. Just across the way was a table whose occupants seemed a little louder than the rest. While everyone else was here for the business of eating, these guys had a higher purpose. They were practicing the ancient art of hanging out. So it was no surprise when they invited us over to share a drink. They were drinking a Chinese liquor called Mao Tai. Our guidebook said it was a sorghum-based drink, but to us it seemed more like something you'd put in your radiator. We didn't want to disappoint our newfound friends, so we stoically downed a few shots with them. While not as smooth as 12-year-old Scotch, it did have a certain something. Perhaps it was an acquired taste. To us it looked like these guys may have been high school buddies, that despite their years, had not yet grown out of each other. While their American counterparts bonded over football and beer, these guys did it over Mao Tais and dumplings. It was out with the boys, Chinese style. For the better part of an hour, we struggled to communicate. Where language failed us, Mao Tai succeeded. Juggling our phrasebook back and forth, we were able to find out a few things about our hosts. One was a school teacher, a couple of the others drove pedicabs, the bicycle-powered rickshaws that could be found everywhere in China. They wanted to show us some of Leshan's sights, especially its most famous attraction, Da Fu, the world's largest stone Buddha. Our newfound friends had the transportation, had their fair share of Mao Tais, and were eager to take us. And this was the beginning of what would become one of the strangest afternoons we'd yet had in China. There's no experience quite like riding behind a couple of drunken pedicab drivers through the streets of a Chinese city. And that's just what we did, traversing our way to Da Fu, world's largest stone Buddha. The school teacher had taken quite a shine to our equipment, especially the video camera. The only thing he hadn't figured out was, if you turn it on, you have to turn it off. Da Fu, here we come. Somehow, you weren't supposed to have this much fun in communist China. Wasn't communism a serious business that had no tolerance for such excessive behavior? Like so much else we'd seen in China, this wild time had challenged our notions of what this country was supposed to be like. After our whirlwind tour of Defu, we had to wonder, what could we possibly give our friends that would somehow be in the same league? How about some lessons in American rock and roll? From Defu, we went across town to a bookstore where someone produced a guitar that looked and sounded like it hadn't been tuned in years. After several futile attempts at tuning it, Leshan's first all-acoustic garage band was born. It was the show of the day. People came out of the woodwork to see these strange foreigners howling and strumming on this noisemaker with strings. Perhaps we'd had one too many Mau Tais. Finally, when we thought they had the hang of it, it was time for the lesson to begin. A little plucking, a little strumming, and before you know it, you feel the power of rock and roll. This had been one of the best times we'd yet had in China. But soon enough, the hangover set in. When our two pedicab drivers finally returned us to our hotel, it became apparent that what to us had seemed like an afternoon of international goodwill was to them international business. They demanded 100 yuan, about $20. While it wasn't a lot of money to us, to the average Chinese, it was about 2 weeks' pay. That gave us a little perspective. Kind of like a New York City cabbie demanding $1,000 for a trip to the airport. We gave them the money, though it served as a reminder to us that on the murky stage of international travel, the gap between rich and poor is always a player.
Coming up, we make our way to Mount Emei, one of the holiest Buddhist sites in all of China. And we discover a secret room that embodies the new China.